rompere la live e andare a lavorare e cancellare la precedente live. In ogni caso, siamo qui e rifaccio l'introduzione da capo molto velocemente perché ovviamente ho perso un'ora per stare dietro al lavoro. Il mio lavoro è così, quando capita un'emergenza, capita. Oggi Edgar Allan Poe l'abbiamo finito e qui ho il prossimo libro, che sarà in inglese. Perché in inglese? Due motivi. Il primo motivo è perché molti libri sono in inglese, c'è poco da farci. In italiano vengono tradotti solo una parte della letteratura. Fortunatamente ci sono anche molti libri italiani che si possono leggere indubbiamente, ci sono anche tante altre letterature, ma sicuramente gli autori più famosi sono quelli inglesi e ce ne sono pochi che vengono tradotti in italiano. Purtroppo molta letteratura viene lasciata in inglese o comunque si trova più facilmente o a più buon prezzo in inglese. Quindi questo è un buon motivo. In futuro quasi sicuramente per alcuni autori dovrò addirittura mischiare le due cose, quindi mi dispiace per chi non capisce l'inglese e tutto, ma il mondo è così. Anche perché non sono ricco, quindi se trovo un libro inglese a 2 euro e la versione italiana mi costa 35, compro il libro inglese a 2 euro. L'ebook. Viene da sé. E l'altra cosa, il secondo motivo è perché io voglio migliorare me stesso e il mio inglese. Ho una buona comprensione del testo in inglese, ma l'ho sempre parlato e letto poco ad alta voce. Quindi la pronuncia, lo speaking è sempre stato un po' carente. E lo voglio migliorare, voglio prenderci più confidenza. E quale miglior modo di prenderci più confidenza che non facendo una lettura live di un libro in inglese? E il primo libro sarà peraltro un libro di Greyhawk di Dungeons and Dragons, ma fatta l'introduzione in italiano passo a fare quella in inglese di introduzione. Quindi welcome to all my non-Italian followers, zero at the moment, but I hope they go up in the future. I'm an Italian guy. I read an English book for the first time live. Why I do this? Because I want to improve in my English skills. I want to improve my English speaking, and the better way is to reading live something in English. So I'm not very good at this. I'm not Patrick Stewart. You can listen. Patrick Stewart is much better than me, but I try because I want to improve myself on English speaking. What I read today, I read Quag Keep. Quag Keep is the first novel of Greyhawk, the first novel of inspired to a setting of Dungeons and Dragons, the most famous role-playing game in the world. I read a brief introduction at Greyhawk from Wikipedia, then I go to read Quag Keep. Sorry, I have the dog. She's stepping. I'm Italian, so sometime I can maybe express something in Italian, so please forgive me. So, Greyhawk. Okay. Okay. Greyhawk, also known as the World of Greyhawk, is a fictional world designed as a campaign setting for the Dungeons and Dragons fantasy role-playing game. Although not the first campaign world developed for Dungeons and Dragons, the Renaissance Blackmoor campaign predated it by over a year, the World of Greyhawk closely identified with the development of the game from 1972 until 2008. The world itself started as a simple dungeon under a castle designed by Gary Gygax for the amusement of his children and friends, but it rapidly expanded to include not only a complex multi-layered dungeon environment, but also the nearby city of Greyhawk, and eventually an entire world. In addition to the campaign world, which was published in several editions over 20 years, Greyhawk was also used as the setting for many adventures published in support of the game, as well as for RPGA massively shared Living Greyhawk campaign from 2000 to 2008. A brief history of Greyhawk and of its creation. In the late 1960s, Gary Gygax, a military history buff and pulp fantasy fan, started to add the elements of fantasy into traditional tabletop medieval miniatures war games at his games club in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. He sometimes replaced typical medieval weapons with magical spells, or used dragons and other fantastical monsters in place of soldiers. In 1971, as part of a rule set for tabletop battles called Chainmail that he was co-writing, he created supplementary rules for magical spells and monsters, as well as one-on-one combat. Around the same time in Minneapolis, St. Paul, another tabletop wargamer, Dave Arneson, was also developing a new type of game. Arneson had been impressed by the Napoleonic tabletop Bronstein campaigns of fellow wargamer David Weasley that developed elements of what is now called role-playing, such as using a natural referee or judge and having the players take on the roles of imaginary characters to resolve challenges. However, Arneson soon grew tired of the Napoleonic setting, and one night when the gaming group assembled, he presented the plastic model of a castle in place of the usual battlefield, and told the players that instead of controlling regiments that night, they would each take one individual character into the castle of the Barony of Blackmoor to explore its dangerous dungeons. For combat resolution, it started by using a rock, paper, and scissors, but quickly moved to a combination of rules that combine chainmail and the nautical war game he had co-written with Gary Gygax and Mike Carr called Don't Give Up the Ship. What set Anderson's game apart from Weasley's tabletop wargaming was that the players could keep the same characters from session to session, and that the characters advanced by developing better abilities or powers over time. Arneson's Minneapolis St. Paul Napoleonic Gaming Group was in touch with Gygax's Lake Geneva group, and Arneson mentioned the dungeons of his Blackmoor game that the group was playing on alternate weekends. Gygax was interested, so during a visit to Lake Geneva in the autumn 1972, Arneson ran a session of his Blackmoor dungeons with Gygax as a player. Gygax was immediately intrigued by the concept of individual characters exploring a dungeon setting, and believed that this was a game that could be marketed and sold. He and Arneson agreed to co-develop a set of rules based on chainmail. Gygax took 2 weeks to write up 50 pages of rules as well as designing Castle Greyhawk and preparing the first level of a dungeon that lay beneath it. 2 of his children, Arnie and Elise, were the first players, and during the first session, as Spencer and Alyssa, they fought and destroyed the first monsters of the Greyhawk dungeon. Gygax recalled them as being either giant centipedes or a nest of scorpions. During the same session, Arnie and Elise also found the first treasure, a chest of 3,000 copper coins, which was too heavy to carry, much to the children's chagrin. After his children had gone to bed, Gygax immediately began working on a second level for the dungeon. At the next play session, Arnie and Elise were joined by Gygax's friends Don Kay, Rob Kuntz, and Terry Kuntz. Kuntz. I don't know. Maybe Kuntz, Rob Kuntz or Rob Kuntz. Maybe you know the answer. I don't know really. About a month after his first session, Gygax created the nearby city of Greyhawk, where the player's character could sell their treasure and find a place to rest. Character, okay. As Gygax and Anderson worked to develop and publish the rules for Dungeons & Dragons through TSR, Gygax continued to design and present the dungeons and environs of Castle Greyhawk to his circle of friends and family, using them as playtester for new rules and concepts. As the players began to explore more of the world outside of the castle and city, Gygax developed other regions and cities for them, with play sessions occurring 7 or more times a week. Gygax didn't have the time or inclination to create the map for a whole new world. He simply drew his world over a map of North America, adding new cities and regions as his world slowly grew through ongoing adventures. The city and the castle of Greyhawk were placed near the real-world position of Chicago, his birthplace. Various other places were clustered around it. For instance, the rival city of Divers he placed in the area of real-world Milwaukee. Gygax also continued to develop the dungeons underneath the castle. By the time he was finished, the complex labyrinth encompassed 13 levels filled with devious traps, secret passageways, angry monsters, and glittering treasure. Although details of these original Greyhawk dungeons have never been published in detail, Gygax gave some glimpses of them in an article he wrote for the European fanzine Europa in 1975. You can find the extract on Wikipedia. Anyone who made it to the bottom level alive meet Zagig, the insane architect of the dungeons. Zagig is a reverse homophone of Gygax. Quindi sarebbe Zegaig, vabbè. Anyway. And it was Gygax's inside joke that the person who had designed the dungeon himself must be insane. Only 3 players ever made it to the bottom level and met Zeigag. All of them during solo adventures. Rob Kunz as Robilar, Gygax's son Ernie as Tenser, and Rob's brother Terry as Derrick. Their reward was to be instantly transported to the far side of the world, where the East faced a long solo trek back to the city of Greyhawk. Derrick and Tenser managed to catch up to Robilar along the way, and the 3 journeyed back to Greyhawk together. By this time, a dozen-player crowded Gygax's basement every night, with over 20 at times on weekends, and the effort needed to plan their adventures took up much of Gygax's spare time. He had been very impressed with Rob Kunz's imaginative play as a player and appointed Rob to be co-dungeon master of Greyhawk. This freed up Gygax to work on other projects and also gave him an opportunity to participate as a player, creating characters like Irag and Mordenkainen, a famous one. In order to make room for Rob Kunz's dungeons, Gygax scrapped his bottom level and integrated Rob's work into the Greyhawk dungeons. Gygax and Kunz continued to develop new levels for their players, and by the time the Greyhawk home campaign drew to close in 1985, the castle dungeons encompassed more than 50 levels. 50. Okay, this paragraph is a little useless for us, so I skip it. In the first issue of The Dragon, published in June 1976, Gygax prefaced Chapter 1 of his serialized novella, The Gnome Caché, with a note that the story setting, Earth, was very similar to Earth in terms of geography. One facet of culture that Gygax did not address during the first few years of his own campaign was organized religion. Since his campaign was largely built around the needs of lower-level characters, he did not think specific deities were necessary, since direct interaction between a god and a low-level character was very unlikely. Some of his players took matters into their own hands, calling upon Norse or Greek gods such as Odin or Zeus, or even Conan Scrum in times of dire need. However, some of the players want Gygax to create and customize a specific deity so that the cleric characters could receive their powers from someone less ambiguous than the gods. Gygax jokingly created 2 gods, Saint Cuthbert, who brought non-believers around to his point of view with walks of his cudgel, like my players in my campaign learn, and Pholtus, whose fanatical followers refused to believe that any other gods exist. Because both of these deities represent aspects of good, Gygax eventually created a few evil deities to provide some villainy. In Chapter 2 of the Gnome Caché, which appeared in the second issue of The Dragon, a shrine to Set Cuthbert was mentioned, which was the first published reference to a Greyhawk deity. In 1976, Gygax invited the science fiction fantasy writer Henry Norton to play Dungeons and Dragons in his Greyhawk world. Norton subsequently wrote Quag Keep, which involved a group of gamers who travel from the real world to Greyhawk. It was the first novel to be set, at least partially, in the Greyhawk setting, and according to alternative words, the first to be based on Dungeons and Dragons. Quag Keep was excerpted adapted in issue 12 of The Dragon, February 1978, just prior to the book's release. So, for all of you, now I'm starting to read Quag Keep. Next time after Quag Keep, I go on with the story of Greyhawk. For now, we stop here. A second. Ok. Vediamo se va tutto. I'm checking if my life going well. Go on with the story of Greyhawk. Okay, let's start. Quag Keep by Norton. The author wishes to express appreciation for the invaluable aid of E. Gary Gygax of TSR, expert player and creator of the war game Dungeons & Dragons. War game, not a role-playing game. Too soon. On which the background of Quag Keep is based. Well, anyway. I wish also to acknowledge the kind assistance of Donald Woolley, an authority and collector of military miniatures, whose special interest was so valuable for my research. Of dragons and dungeons, we have discovered that it may be entirely possible that what a man dreams in one world may be created and given substance in another, and if more than one dream, the same dreams, strive to bring them to life, then the more solid and permanent becomes that other world. Also, dreams seep from one space-time level of a world to another, taking root in new soil, and there growing perhaps even to great permanence. You have all played what you call a war game, building a world you believe imaginary in which to stage your adventures and explore. Well enough, what harm lies in that? Only what if the first dreamer who invent this world according to your conception gathered unknowingly dream knowledge of one that did and does exist in another time and space? Have you ever thought of that? This is only an intro by Norton, because at the time role-playing is not a thing, so no one knew what a role-playing game was. Chapter 1. Greyhawk. I drink a sip of water because Yes, it's very hard to read an English book when you are an Italian guy. Take him the word. Chapter 1. Greyhawk. Extern produced the package with an exaggerated flourish and left the lid of the box to pluck out the shredded packing with as much care as if he were about to display the crown jewels of some long-forgotten kingdom. His showmanship brought the other side closer. Extem liked such chances to focus attention, and tonight, as the referee chosen to set up the war game, his actions were backed with special authority. He unwrapped a length of cotton and set out on the table, between the waiting game sheets, a 2-inch figure larger than any they habitually played with. It was indeed a treasure, a swordsman complete with shield, on which a nearly microscopic heraldic design blazed forth in brilliant enamel paints. The tiny face of the figure was sternly set above the rim of the shield, shadowed by a helmet with a small twist of spike rising from it. There was an indication of mail on the body which had been modeled as if the figure were advancing a step in grim determination. Okay. The sword in the hand was a length of glittering metal, more like a well-polished steel than lead, which was the usual material for playing figures. Martin stared at it in fascination. He had seen many expertly painted and well-positioned wargames figures, but this gave him a queer feeling, as if it had not been torn out of a mold, but rather had been designed by a sculptor in the form of a man who once had lived. Where did you get that? Harry Cowden's slight hesitation of speech was more pronounced than usual. A beauty, isn't it? Extern peered. A new company, KQ Productions, and you wouldn't believe the price either. They sent a letter and at least want to introduce their pieces to well-known players. After we won those 2 games at the last convention, I guess they had us near the top of their list. To Martin, external explanation was only a meaningless babble. His hand had gone out without his conscious willing to touch fingertip on that shield, make sure it did exist. It was true that the makers of playing pieces for the fantasy war games were starting to try to outdo each other in the production of unusual monster, noble fighters, astute elves, powerful dwarves, and all the other characters a player might call for, identify with while playing, even keep on display like some fabulous antique chessman between games. Characters. Martin had envied those able to equip themselves with the more ornate and detailed figures, but the best he had seen in displays could not compare to this. Within him came a sudden compulsion. He must have this one. It was beyond any doubt meant for him. Ekstrom was still talking as he unwrapped, and other figures set them out, his elbow firmly planted meanwhile on the referee notes for the coming game, but Martin's attention never wavered from the swordman. This was his. He grasped it lovingly. There were good smells and stale ones fighting for dominance in a room lit only by baskets of fire wasps, one of which was close enough so that he could see every old stain on the table at which he sat. By his right hand stood a drinking horn mounted on a base of dual metal. His right hand, he stirred at both ends, the fists slightly clenched and lying on the scoreboard. It seemed that his mind had skipped something of importance. His heart might skip a bit. This was, of course, the sign of Arvel's axe, a dubious inn on the edge of the thief's quarter in the city of Greyhawk. He frowned, troubled. But there had been something else, something of importance, of which only hints glittered so swiftly through his brain that he could not fasten on it quickly enough. Sorry, vado avanti troppo. Okay. His name was Milo Yegon, a swordsman of some experience, now unemployed. That much was clear, and the hands before him were bare below sleeves of very supple, dark-colored mail, which had a hint of copper in it, yet was darker brown. Turned back against his wrist were mitts fastened to the sleeves, and about each of his thumbs was the white band of a ring. The one to the right was set with an oblong stone of dull green, across which, in no discernible pattern, wandered tiny red veins and dots. The setting on the left was even more extraordinary, an oval crystal of grey, clouded and filmed. On the right wrist there was a glint of something else, again that faintest hint of other memory, even of alarm touched Milo's mind. He jerked down the right mitt and saw, bended over the mail itself, a white bracelet of a metal as richly bright as newly polished copper. It was made of 2 bands, between which swung on hardly visible gimbals were a series of dice 3-sided, 4-sided, 8-sided, 6-sided. They were of the same bright metal as the bracelet that supported them, but the numbers on them were wrought in glistening bits of gemstones, so Tini did not see how any gem-smith could have set them in so accurately. This with his left hand they touched that bracelet, finding that the metal warmed to his fingertips. This was important. His skull grew deeper, but why and how? And he could not remember having come here. Also, he raised his head to stare about uneasily. He sensed that he was watched. Yet there were none in the marker room. He was quick enough to catch eyeing him. The nearest table to his own was also occupied by a single man. He had the bulk, the wide shoulders, and thick mail-covered forearms of a man who would be formidable in a fight. Milo assessed him, only half-consciously, with the experienced eye of one who had needed many times in the past to know the nature of an enemy, and that quickly. The cloak the other man had tossed to the bench beside him was of hide covered with horny bracelets, and his helmet was surmounted with a realistic and daunting representation of a snarling boar brought dangerously to the bay. Beneath the edge of it, his face was wide of the cheekbone, as square of jaw, and he was staring, as Milo had been, at his hands on the tabletop before him. Between them crouched a bright green-blue pseudo-dragon, its small wings fluttering, its arrow-pointed tongue darting in and out. And on his right wrist, Milo drew a deep breath. The stranger wore a bracelet twin to his own, as far as the swordsman could see without truly examining it. Bore helm, bore cloak, memories and knowledge Milo did not consciously search for arose. This other was a berserker, and one with skill enough to turn were-bore if he so desired. Such were Shenchi companions at the best, and the swordsman did not wonder now that their two tables, so close together, were theirs alone, that the rest of the patrons, eating and drinking, had sought the other side of the long room. Nor was he surprised that the stranger should have the pseudo-dragon as a traveling companion or pet, whichever their relationship might be. For the words, like the elves and some others, could communicate with animals at will. Once more, Milo gave a searching, very steady survey of the others in the room. There were several thieves, he guessed, and one or two foreigners, who, he hoped, for their own sakes, were tough enough to defend themselves if they had wandered into Harvell's axe without due warning. A cloaked man who, he thought, might be a druid of low rank, was spooning up stew with such avidity that spattering drops formed gobbets of grease on his clothing. Milo was paying particular attention to right wrist. Those he could see were certainly innocently bare of any such bending as he and the berserker were. At the same time, the impression that he was being watched, and not with any kindness, grew in him. He dropped a hand to sword hilt and, for the first time, noted that the shield leaned against the table. On it was emblazoned an intricate pattern which, though dented in place and plainly weather-worn, had once been skillfully done, and he had seen that where... What is that? The vagrant curl of memory grew no stronger for his trying to grasp it. He grinned sorely. Of course, he had seen it many times over. The thing wasn't it? And he had calluses from its weight along his arm to prove that. At least he had the wisdom to pick a table where he sat with his back to the wall. Now, there flowed through his mind memories of other times when he had been in just such uncertain lodgings. A table swung up and moved forward to serve as a barrier to the terror rush. And the other door? There were two doors in the room. One led, uncurtained, to the inner part of the inn. The other had a heavy leather drape over it. Unfortunately, that was on the opposite side of the room. To reach it, he would have to pass a group he had been watching with quick glances. 5 men gathered close together whispering. They had seemed to show no interest in him, but Milo did not depend on such uncertain reassurance of innocence. The eternal war between law and chaos flared often in Greyhawk. It was in a manner of speaking a free city that had no one overlord to hold it firmly to his will. For that reason, it had become a city of masterless men, a point from which many expeditions, privately conceived and planned for the despoiling of ancient treasure, would set out, having recruited the members from just such masterless men as Milo himself, or perhaps the berserker only an arm's length away. But if those on the side of law recruited here, so did the followers of chaos. There were neutrals also, willing to join with either side for the sake of payment, but they were never to be well depended upon by any man who had intelligence, for they might betray one at the flip of a coin or the change of the wind itself. As a swordsman, Milo was vowed to law. The berserker had more choice in such matters. In the first Dungeons and Dragons, you can only choose an alignment. You can have the free will of nowadays. But this place, under its odors of fresh and stale food, stank to Milo of chaos. What had brought him here? If he could only remember. Was his spell struck in some fashion? That idea caught and held in his mind to worry him even more. No man, unless he had won to high adeptship and therefore was no longer entirely human, could even begin to reckon the kinds and numbers of spells that might be set to entangle the unwary. But he knew that he was waiting, and he again tested the looseness of his sword within his sheath, keeping his other hand close to the edge of the table, tense as a man may be before he reaches a position he had chosen for his own defense. Then, in the light of the fire wasp, he coaxed the flashes from his wrist. Dice moving. Again he half remembered a fast, fleeting wisp of some other knowledge he should have and did not, to his own danger. But it was not the suspected man in the corner who were a threat. Instead, the berserker got to his feet. Up the mighty thickness of his mailed arm fluttered the pseudo-dragon. To perch upon his shoulder, his spear-tongue darting against the cheekpiece of his heavy helmet. He cocked up his cloak, but he did not turn to the leather curtain of the outer door. Instead, he took 2 strides and stood towering over Milo. Under the brush of his brows, his eyes held a red glint, like those of an angry boar, and he thrust out his hand and wrist to match Miles. There, too, showered the glint of the dice, turning by themselves on their almost invisible gimbals. I am Nail Fangtooth. His voice was close to a low grunting, and as his lips moved to form the words, they betrayed the reason for his self-naming 2 teeth, as great as tusks set on either side of his lower jaw. He spoke as if compelled to, and Milo found that he answered as if he must offer some password, lest the danger that made his flesh crawl break forth. Yet, at the same moment, he knew that his sense of danger did not came from this mightily fighting machine. I am Milo Yegon. Sit you down, fighting man. Or Yegon, I suppose, Yegon. He moved his shield, slid farther along the bench to make room for the other. I don't know why, but Fangtooth's eyes no longer held those of the swordsman. Rather, he was looking with an open expression of perplexity at their bracelets. But he continued after a moment's pause. This is what I must do, join with you. And this, he attempted to slip the bracelet from his thick wrist, but could not move it. Is what commands me, after some fashion of its own. We must be spelled. Milo returned frankness with frankness. Berserkers seldom sought out any but their own kind. Among their fellows, they had the comradeship that leads to the shores of death and beyond. For the survivor of a fatal encounter was then aware always of only one driving force, the need for revenge upon those who had slain his other self in battle kinship. The berserker scowled. Spells, they have a sting to them. And yes, swordsman, I can pick up the stink a little. Afrita, the pseudo-dragon flickered its thread of tongue like a signal. I'd already sniffed it. Yet it is not, I think, one sent by a dark-loving devil. He had kept his voice low with a visible effort, as if his natural tone was more of a full-throated roar. Milo noted that the eyes beneath those heavy brows were never still, that a Nail Fangtooth watched the company in the room with a skin, an eye for trouble as he himself had earlier. Those who whispered together had not once made any move to suggest that the two were of interest to them. The shabby druid licked his spoon, then raised the bowl to his lips to sup down the last of the broth it contained, and two men wearing the shoulder badges of some merchant's escort kept drinking steadily, as if their one purpose in life was to see which first would get enough of a skinful to subside to the rush-strewn, ill-swept floor. They, none of them, wear this. Milo indicated the bracelet on his own wrist. The dice were now quiet on their gimbals. In fact, when he tried to swing one with his fingernail, it remained as fixed as if it could never move. Yet it was the same one he had seen turn just before Neil had joined him. No, the berserker blinked. There is something that nibbles at my mind, as a squirrel warriors awaited a nut. I should know, but I do not. And you, swordsman? His soul did not lighten as he looked directly at Milo. There was accusation in it, as if he believed the swordsman knew the secret of this strange meeting, but was purposefully keeping it to himself. It is the same, Milo admitted. I feel I must remember something. Yet it is as if I beat against a locked door in my mind. I cannot win through that to the truth. I have nearly fainted. The berserker was not speaking to Milo now, but rather affirming his identity as if he needed such assurance. I was with the Bretem when they took the Mirror of Lois and the standard of King Hiveron. It was then that my shield brother, Angle Whiteband, was cut down by the snakeskins. Also, it was there, later, that I picked Ifrita, I presume? Ifrita, from a cage, so she joined with me. He raised a big hand and gently stroked the back of the dragon at a spot between its continually fluttering wings. These things I remember, yet there was more. The Mirror of Lois, Milo repeated. Where had he heard of that before? He raised both fists and pressed them against his forehead, pushing up the edge of the helmet he wore. The edges of the two thumbs rings pressed against his skin, giving it a slightly twinge of pain, but nothing answered in his memory. Yes, there was pride now in his companion's voice. There was a mighty hosting. Ours, even the spectre of Lois herself, stood against us. But we had the luck of the throws with us for that night, the luck of the throws. Now it was Fengto's turn to look at the bracelets on his own wrist. The throws. He repeated for the second time. It means... His face twisted, and he beat upon the table board with one calloused fist, so mighty a blow that the home cup it did not overturn. What throws? The skull it turned upon Milo now was as grim as a battle face. I don't know. Milo wet his lips with his tongue. He had no fear of the berserker, even though the huge man might well be deliberately working himself into one of those rages that transcended intelligence and made such a fighter impervious to weapons and some spells. Once more he struggled to turn the dice on the bracelet. Far back in his mind he knew them. They had a very definite purpose. All here and now he was like a man set down before some ancient roll of knowledge that he could not read and yet knew that his life perhaps depended upon translating it. This, he said slowly, one turn just before you joined me. They are like gamer's dice, save that there are too many shapes among them to be ordinary. Yes, Neil's voice had fallen again. Still I have thrown such, and for a reason or reasons. But why or where, I cannot remember. I think, swordsman, that someone thinks to play a game with us. If this be so, he shall discover that he has chosen not tools but man, and therefore will be the worse for his folly. If we are bespelled, Milo began. He wanted to keep the berserkers away from the battle madness of his kind. It was useful, very useful, that madness, but only in the proper place and time, and to erupt not even knowing the nature of the enemy was rank folly. Then, sooner or later, we shall meet the spellcaster. To Milo's relief, Fangtooth seemed well able to control the power of word change that was his by right. Yes, that is what I believe we wait for now. The druid, without a single glance in that direction, had sat by his now empty bow and got to his feet, ringing down on the tabletop a small coin. He wore, Milo noted as he turned and his robe napped up a little, not the sandals suitable for city streets, but badly cured and clumsily made hide boots, such as a peasant might use for field labor in ill weather. The bag marked with the runes of his training was a small one and as shabby as his robe. He gave a jerk to bring his cowl higher over his head and started for the outer door, nor did he make an attempt to approach their table. Milo was glad to see the last of him. Druids were shanty at best, and there were those who had the brand of chaos and the powers of the outer dark at their call. This one was manifestly lowly placed in that close-knit and secret fraternity. Fangtooth's lip pierced as if he would spit after the figure now tugging aside the door curtain. "Cooker of spells," he commented. "But not the one who holds us," Milo said. "True enough. Tell me, swordsman, does your skin now prickle? Does it seem that, without your helm to hold it down, your very hair might rise on your head? Whatever has knitted us comes the closer. Yet a man cannot fight what he cannot see, hear, or know is alive." The berserker was far more astute than Milo had first thought him. Because of the very nature of the bestial ferocity such fighters fell into upon occasion, one was apt to forget that they had their own powers and were moved by intelligence as well as by the superhuman strength they could command. Fangtooth had the right of it. His own discomfort had been steadily growing. What they awaited was nearly here. Now the 5 whisperers also rose and passed one by one beyond the curtain. It was as if someone or something were clearing the stage for a struggle. Yet still Milo could not locate any of the sign of chaos. On the berserker's shoulder, the pseudo-dragon chittered, rubbing its head back and forth on the cheek plate of the boar-crowned helmet. Milo found himself watching, not the small reptile, but rather the bracelet on his wrist. It seemed to have loosened somewhat its grip against his mail. 2 of the dice began slowly to spin. Now Neil got to his feet. In his left hand he held a diddle battle axe of such weight that Milo trained Tugi was to handle many different weapons. Tugi could never have brought to shoulder height. They were alone in the long room. Even those who had served had gone, as if they had some private knowledge of ill to come and would not witness it. Still, what Milo felt was not the warning prick of normal fear, rather an excitement, as if he stood on the verge of learning the answer to all questions. As Neil had done, he got to his feet, lifted his shield. The dice on his bracelet burned to a stop as the high door curtain was drawn aside, letting in a blast of late fall, winter-touched air. A man, slight and so well cloaked that he seemed merely some shadow detached from a nearby wall to roam aimlessly about, came swiftly in. And this is the end of the first chapter. So, for today, for beginning, this is enough. Next time, Wednesday, I read another 2 chapters. The second and the third. For today I stop here and I say to you goodbye to the next time. Click my big finger.